Tumia Bima Pap kwa kupiga nyota 150 nyota 51 alama ya reli au kwa WhatsApp tuma neno Bima Pap kwenda namba 0764166066 ujipatie bima.
Bima Pap, urahisi wa maisha.
Hello citizens, it's another great episode of the Citizen Exclusive with Mpoki Thomson. Today's conversation is going to take place at the World Bank offices in Dar es Salaam. I'm with the country director for the World Bank, Nathan Belete. Nathan Belete, welcome to the Citizen Digital.
Thank you so much, happy to be with you.
Perfect. Now, you have been serving as the country director for the World Bank here in Tanzania, but also overseeing Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. It has been a little over a year since you were appointed to your role. We would like to know, our audience and our readers of the Citizen newspaper and our audience who are watching us online would want to know your take for the past 1 year. I'm quite sure you've gone through a lot, you've experienced a lot in Tanzania and the region. We would want to know what is on top of your agenda, what has kept you awake at night, and what will continue to keep you awake at night as you continue to serve in this role. Welcome.
Thank you so much again. Pleasure to be with you. I think that, let me start by saying not much keeps me awake at night in Tanzania, because I think Tanzania is one of the better performing economies in Africa. That doesn't mean there's a lot that can be done and that should be done, but generally speaking, what we see in Tanzania is an economy that's stable, where you have a macroeconomic situation that's robust as compared to many of its neighbors, and where we see that the growth is moving in the right direction. The last couple of decades have been very positive for Tanzania, as you well know.
Yeah.
The one area where it's been less positive is in how inclusive poverty reduction has been. While the economic growth numbers are higher than most countries, poverty hasn't gone down at the same pace. And so if there is something that would keep me awake, is how can we make this growth more inclusive, so we see more Tanzanians reaping the benefits of a stronger economy. And that's our focus of all the work that we're doing in terms of the reform agenda with the government as well as with our investments.
Okay, now that we're talking about the economic performance over the years, the World Bank's Country Economic Memorandum has assessed Tanzania's economic performance dating back to over 20 years ago. And what has been notable in that report is the fact that the economic performance has been shifting, or at least the area of focus has been shifting more towards the investment into public infrastructure, specifically transport and energy. So now we're talking about the SGR, we have the hydropower dam, and then we have the ECOP. But then again, it is said that this shift might have a negative effect, might have a negative impact at the end of the day. I want you to give us a sense of your take in this report, in the sustainability, and also the caution that has been raised in the report on how Tanzania can now address these challenges as the economic performance, the focus areas keep shifting.
So I think that's a very good question. I think that one of the, when we look back over the past 2 decades, one thing that we've noticed is that structural transformation is not happening. And that is a cause for poverty reduction to not be happening as fast as one would like. In the early 2000s, poverty reduction was happening at a greater pace than it is today. For precisely one of the reasons that you mentioned is the public sector infrastructure investments. The correlation to job creation impacting on the livelihoods of the poor is less, because most of those investments, while fueling the economy, are not necessarily touching a wider part of the population. For example, if we saw a lot more transformation in agriculture, obviously we'd see higher rates of poverty reduction. So this is why the government has also seen this as a challenge and seen the need to place greater attention on looking at these primary sectors and how to invest in those to make them more pro-poor and more conducive to growing and improving the livelihoods of the people of Tanzania.
Okay, but then despite this caution that has been issued by the World Bank, there seems to be still an interest by international organizations such as yourself to give grants, to give loans to Tanzania, to developing countries, to enable them build these massive infrastructures. Is it your opinion now that you would be less positive about giving loans that are dedicated, that are directed to these mega projects? Is that your opinion?
So let me say that our strategy in Tanzania right now is very much correlated with the government's strategies in the sectors that we've agreed to cooperate. So let me start first on our reform agenda. We have a substantial engagement with the government, with the authorities, on advancing critical reforms in a couple of key areas. First and foremost is private sector development. Her Excellency the President has been very clear on the need for the private sector to become much more dynamic. We all know that countries go on the backs of the private sector, and Tanzania has huge potential, but the ecosystem in supporting private sector development is not as pro-business as it should be. Licensing, registration, tax policies are not where they should be. And for that reason, we're working with the authorities on trying to streamline these, trying to make them more pro-business, and to enable them to transact more, to undertake more trade, and reduce these trade restrictions that are there. The second part is on expanding access to finance. Access to finance is a critical impediment to lots of businesses, small enterprises, medium-sized enterprises. So the extent to which we can improve access to finance will directly contribute to the expansion of the private sector. And the third is in digital. The faster digitalization can happen, you get greater transparency, greater efficiency, as well as greater revenues for both the country, for the public revenue generation, as well as for private business. So these are the areas right now in reforms that we're working with the government, and as you mentioned, the country economic memorandum is focused on that. It's about privatizing growth.
Now, instead of this being more in the rhetoric, because we know that even the government themselves, they understand the need to do some of these major reforms in digital, financial inclusion, tax reforms, and all that. In one of your reports, you had suggested that perhaps Tanzania should consider taxing more these big corporations or the wealthy. Do you think that that is an approach that is can be implemented in Tanzania in light of the government's reform of trying to attract more investors? Now, if an investor hears that the World Bank is advising the Tanzanian government, at least maybe you can put this in more context, that the Tanzanian government is being advised to tax the wealthy, to tax the big corporations. Do you think that that might not be counterproductive for the government's strategy of attracting more investors as you advise them to do these major tax reforms?
So I think we should look at the totality of our analysis of the needs of the private sector and the tax regime. I think what's important to note is that the tax regime needs to be consistent. It needs to be broad-based, and it needs to be done in a manner that's transparent. I think that if that is the case, I think you would have investors who would be much more interested, willing to come in and invest because they understand what their requirements are. And this is why I said what's really, really important is to have an ecosystem, a business environment that's friendly, that's pro-investment, that will enable businesses to start up with ease, to transact with ease, to trade with ease, under clearly defined rules of the game. And by digitizing these, I think it becomes a much more friendly atmosphere and responsive to the needs of the country as well.
Okay, so now going back to the country economic memorandum, one of the interesting aspects that I noted when I was reading that report was the fact that Tanzania has one of the lowest poverty elasticity in Africa and in the world, probably because of the fact that a lot or a bigger majority of the population is exposed to these economic shocks, where by one today is out of the poverty line and then the next day back into the poverty line. I want to get your insights into how now the country can address this poverty reduction in the fact that we recently hosted the Human Capital Summit here in Tanzania, which talks about now upscaling the wider majority of the population so that we have now a more skilled working class. What is your opinion on how Tanzania can address poverty reduction as the economic scale also moves up?
That's a very good question. So, as you see in the country economic memorandum, which by the way we haven't done in 10 years, so it's really exciting that we've been able to do this in coordination with the authorities. There's 5 priority policy actions that are come out in the report. The first is, as we just discussed, is really how to improve the business environment. The second, I think, comes to the point that you were trying to make, is how to address the underlying poverty dynamics while promoting the business sector. And for this, we believe that the country has to have a very robust social protection program, because we realize that there are poor and vulnerable that exist and will exist due to natural reasons, climate reasons, and for that reason, it's important that the country, Tanzania, has a good social protection system, but it needs to be adequately financed as well. So that's another recommendation of the report. The third recommendation of the report is on the agriculture sector, and this is a major one because a majority of the employment comes from agriculture. So undertaking reforms and investments in the agriculture sector can be really transformational, and making sure that those things are climate smart. The fourth is the tourism sector. There's a lot that can be done in the tourism sector. A lot of investments are needed, both on infrastructure, but also in the enabling environment for them. But all of these has to be done in a sustainable manner, looking at the environment, looking at the financial viability, but also in terms of making sure that it's inclusive, benefiting of the local host communities, so that they are part of that of the benefits of tourism. And the last is using Tanzania's incredible geographic location. Its massive coastline, its ability to access all these countries around. So if the infrastructure is put in place to facilitate trade, cooperation with the neighbors, we believe that these overall actions would help boost prosperity in the country and ultimately drive down poverty.
Okay, now, so speaking about Tanzania's potential, it is projected that in the next, I think, 73 years, when we reach 2100, Tanzania will be home to a whopping 244 million people. That's the 4th highest population in Africa and the 9th globally. But then the report also noted something that is of interest, that the fact that the focus on domestic market to drive growth does not really reflect that growth because of their purchasing power parity, because of the ability for Tanzanians to afford, boosting the economy. What is your view on that? As the government now has this idea of focusing on boosting the domestic market, but then again, the numbers not quite add up. How can this issue be addressed? Because of the fact that the population will keep growing, Dar es Salaam will be home to close to 20 million people by the year 2050. But then again, if the local domestic market cannot really keep the economy afloat, how can such dynamics be addressed?
So maybe I can respond to your question in a slightly different way, through looking at it through the lens of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think this, we've done some simulations and some models on how this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will impact Tanzania. And from our simulation and analysis, we think it would be highly positive for Tanzania. For example, we believe that should this come into effect, Tanzania exports could increase by almost 43%, that GDP could increase by almost 7.5% just in the next 10 years. This in and of itself could be a major game changer for the country and obviously would influence the actions that are needed. But in order to realize these, there's actions that the government would need to take, for example, the non-tariff measures to facilitate trade, to ensure that trade isn't stagnant. And these actions, I think, you would see would directly benefit livelihoods and poverty numbers in the near term.
Okay, so COP28 recently came to a close, and I think the African continent saw the adverse impact of climate change more potently this year than in any other year, and it quite happened coincidentally during the COP28. We saw what happened here in Tanzania. Now, the World Bank through the IDA, you're helping Tanzania address some of the critical areas that are adversely impacted by floods, the Msimbazi Basin. But then again, there's also been an issue in that project, the implementation phase. A lot of grievances for people who were residing within those environs, but they understand us as commuters who rely on that major pathway into the metropolis. We look at it as a big challenge. I want to get a sense of your opinion on that specific project, the $200 million that has been pledged for that specific development. What is your view of the implementation phase and the grievances?
So, first of all, I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that there are lots of people that reside in those areas. There's lots of businesses that are in those areas that need to be addressed very carefully. The second point is that climate change is real. Climate change is real. We as residents here in Dar es Salaam face it every day. In the recent couple of weeks, we've seen how the impacts of the rains are affecting daily life. And for that reason, all investments and all activities that we're undertaking really need to be taken with a solid climate lens. And for that reason, the investments that we're supporting are trying to assess how to best address and mitigate the impacts of climate change while at the same time responding to the needs of the people. In this case, it's Dar es Salaam, but in all our projects, if you look across the country, we're really looking at this climate issue as a centerpiece of how we address activities. So what I would say in that is that we take the impact on beneficiaries very seriously. We closely review the impacts of them and work with the government to come up with solutions that are benefit all. And we'll continue to do that.
Okay, so Mr. Belete, last but not least, I want to get your opinion on, or your outlook on Tanzania's economic performance. The country has gone through and continues to go through major reforms. We're projected to become one of the biggest economies in Africa, and I think second to Ethiopia in the East African region. What is your outlook on Tanzania's economic performance, and how should we best address some of the challenges that might lie ahead?
So let me first say that Tanzania is blessed to have stability, and I think this is something that we can't take lightly. As a fellow African, I would say I think it's absolutely critical, and it's something that all Tanzanians should be proud of. Secondly, I think Tanzania is performing very well compared to many of its peers in Africa. The economy is stable. Macroeconomic conditions are positive. You have a debt situation that's sustainable. But I think there is a need for more concerted effort to address the underlying challenges of growth and poverty inequality. And for that reason, I think the focus of Her Excellency President Samia's government on improving the business environment, on looking at climate as a real issue and integrating climate-friendly policy across all the ministries, and also looking at how to develop your human capital is absolutely critical. So for us, we look forward to continuing to work closely with the government on all these areas.
Okay, on that note, Mr. Belete, thank you.
Thank you.
You were with me, Mpoki Thomson, for the Citizen Digital. That's a wrap for today's episode. Until next time, bye-bye.
Kabla tujaanza safari, wengi tukikumbuka tutahakikisha matairi upepo upo fresh. Tutahakikisha spana na jeki zipo na zinafanya kazi. Tutahakikisha breki zinakamata, taa za mbele, nyuma, indicator, hazard zinawaka. Hapo sawa. Wiper zinafanya kazi. Tutaangalia oili, injini na maji. Tutanunua bima na bima papo ili zisome na kusomeka. Kisha gari inaoshwa. Yote hayo ni utayari wa chombo chako na changamoto za safari. Ila so kwa ajili yako wewe dereva. Dereva, umechukua hatua gani kulinda uhakika wa kuendelea kujipatia hela? Si unajua ya barabarani hayatabiriki.
Tumia bima pap kwa kupiga *150 *51 alama ya reli au kwa WhatsApp namba 0764166066 na ujipatie bima ya dereva kipato.
Umahiri wa dereva hauishii tu kwenye kumudu usukani, bali pia umakini wa kulinda kipato chake wakati wa majanga ya kifedha.
Bima Pub, urahisi wa maisha.